It all began on a Tuesday, a day so painfully ordinary that its memory feels like a faded photograph from someone else's life. The sun was casting long, gentle shadows across our kitchen floor, and the scent of toast hung in the air, a scent of home. My husband Leo sat across from me at our small oak table, his familiar face etched with the lines of a shared decade. Everything was perfect, a fragile snow globe of domestic peace, just before the first violent shake. It started with the coffee. For 10 years, Leo had despised the drink, its bitter smell always making him wrinkle his nose in a way I found endearing. He called it burnt bean water, a silly phrase that became one of our little inside jokes, a testament to our intertwined lives. Yet on this Tuesday morning, he sat across from me, sipping it black as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I must have been staring, because he looked up from his mug, his brow furrowed in a way that was almost, but not quite, his. "What is it, Ilara?" he asked, and his voice was the same melody I knew by heart, but a single note was flat, almost imperceptible. I forced a laugh, a brittle sound in the quiet room, trying to dismiss the cold prickle crawling up my spine. "You're drinking coffee." He glanced down at the dark liquid, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, a brief moment of intellectual assessment. "I guess I am," he said with a small shrug, a gesture that was too loose, too casual for the man I knew. People change. But Leo didn't change like that. He was a man of comfortable routines and fierce loyalties to his own tastes, a human anchor. That single wrong detail was a tiny crack in the mirror of my reality, a hairline fracture I couldn't stop tracing with my mind. The day continued, and I tried to bury the unease under a pile of work emails and household chores, telling myself it was nothing. I found his favorite gray sweater, the one with the worn-out elbows, neatly folded in a donation pile by the door. He loved that sweater. That evening, as we sat on the sofa, the city lights painting patterns on our wall, I brought up our first vacation together. I reminisced about the little restaurant in Lisbon where we'd been caught in a rainstorm, laughing as we ate grilled sardines. He smiled, but it was a polite, distant smile, the kind you give a stranger telling a story you don't quite follow. "I don't really remember the rain," he said, his gaze fixed on the television screen, not on me. "Are you sure that was Lisbon?" My blood ran cold. That memory was a cornerstone of our relationship, a story we'd recounted dozens of times. For him to not remember, it was like a historian forgetting a war, a painter forgetting the color blue. It was impossible. I felt a chasm open between us on that sofa, an invisible, silent gap that was suddenly miles wide. My Leo was in there somewhere. I started watching him then, not as a wife, but as a scientist observing an anomaly, a detective studying a suspect. I noticed how he now slept on his back, perfectly still, when for years he had been a restless side sleeper, always stealing the blankets. I noticed how he no longer hummed, a constant, tuneless sound that used to be the background music to our life at home. The silence he left in its place was deafening, a void where something familiar should have been. It was an erasure. One night, I watched him sleep, the moonlight casting his features in silver and shadow, a perfect marble sculpture of my husband. His face was flawless, every line and pore exactly where it should be, a mask of perfect identity. But his chest rose and fell with a rhythm that was too steady. It was the metronomic breathing of something deeply, profoundly at rest. It was the breathing of something that did not dream. Fear, true and sharp, pierced through my denial. This wasn't my husband. This was something wearing his skin like a well-tailored suit. The next day, I began my search for proof, my hands trembling as I unlocked his phone while he was in the shower. I scrolled through his messages and photos, my heart pounding, looking for a mistake, a slip-up, anything to expose the imposter. But there was nothing. Every text was plausible, every email mundane. The performance was flawless, airtight. It was almost disappointing. It made me question my own mind, a terrifying thought that this fog of wrongness was a product of my own unraveling psyche. Was I the one who was broken? The thought was a brief, seductive comfort, a way out of this waking nightmare. The relief was shattered when I went to look for our old photo albums, hidden away in the top of our shared closet. I reached for the familiar worn shoebox, the one labeled Us, filled with faded Polaroids and glossy prints of our past. My fingers brushed against something else, a different box, small, wooden, and cold to the touch. I had never seen it before in my life. My breath hitched. It was tucked away behind his winter coats, a deliberate act of concealment in our most private space. With trembling hands, I pulled the wooden box down, dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from the hallway. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid, my mind racing with possibilities. Old letters from a past lover, a hidden memento. The reality was far stranger. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a single peculiar object. It was a small, intricately carved bird's skull made not of bone, but of a smooth, pearlescent material that seemed to drink the light. And threaded through its empty eye sockets was a lock of hair. It was my hair. I knew the exact shade of auburn, the slight curl at the end. I felt a wave of vertigo so intense I had to grip the doorframe to keep from falling. This was not a memory. This was a threat. I heard the shower stop. The sound of the bathroom door opening echoed down the hall like a judge's gavel. I had to put it back. My movements were frantic as I shoved the skull back in the box, closed the lid, and pushed it back into its hiding place. I stumbled out of this closet just as he walked into the bedroom, a towel around his waist, water dripping from his hair onto the floor. He looked at me, his head tilted slightly, that same analytical gaze returning, assessing my flushed face and ragged breathing. "Everything okay, Alara?" he asked, his voice a calm, placid lake on the surface of which I could now see a million monstrous things reflected. I nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight with terror. The lie felt like swallowing glass. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that didn't reach his eyes. Those cold, familiar eyes. The smile remained on his face for a moment too long. A perfect, predatory curve. I felt like a mouse being studied by an owl. That night, sleep was not a refuge, but a different kind of vigil. I lay beside him, my back rigid, listening to his unnaturally steady breathing. I was sharing a bed with a question mark, a monster dressed in memories, and the warmth from his body felt like the heat from a furnace. I pretended to be asleep when he rose just before dawn, a time he never once woke in 10 years of our life together. I watched through slitted eyes as he moved not towards the bathroom or kitchen, but to the large mirror hanging on our bedroom wall. He stood before it, perfectly still, his silhouette a dark shape against the gray pre-dawn light filtering through the window. He wasn't admiring his reflection. He was studying it with an unnerving intensity, as if checking the seams of a disguise. Then he did something that made the air freeze in my lungs. He raised a hand and slowly, deliberately, pressed his face against the cold glass. It was a gesture of profound strangeness, intimate and alien. He stayed like that for a full minute, just breathing onto the mirror. He wasn't looking at himself. He was looking through the glass, as if expecting to see something else on the other side. When he finally pulled away, there was no breath fog on the mirror, not a single trace of condensation. It was as if he had no warmth, no life to give. My carefully constructed denial shattered into a million pieces. This was real. It was happening. And I was utterly, completely alone. My paranoia began to bleed out from him and into the world around me. The very fabric of my home started to feel subtly wrong. A crack in the ceiling I'd never noticed before seemed to form the shape of a leering eye. The house settled with groans that sounded like whispers. The ticking of our grandfather clock in the hall no longer felt comforting, but like a countdown to something dreadful. I felt like the protagonist of a ghost story, haunted not by a spirit, but by the slow, creeping corruption of my own reality. I needed an anchor, an outside perspective. I decided to call his mother, a woman who knew her son better than anyone. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number, my mind racing to invent a casual reason for my call. My excuse was a question about an old family recipe. "Oh, Leo's a wonderful boy," she said, her voice warm and familiar over the phone. "He called me just yesterday, in fact." My heart skipped a beat. Leo hated talking on the phone. He always made me do it. That was another piece that didn't fit. He sounded so good, Ilara," she continued, oblivious to my turmoil. "So clear. Usually he mumbles, you know? It's like he's a new man." Her words were meant as a compliment, but to me, they were a confirmation. A new man. She had no idea how literal that phrase was. The call ended with pleasantries that felt like lies. I hung up, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me, more isolated than ever. This thing, this entity, it wasn't just performing for me. It was performing for everyone, weaving a new reality around itself. It tried to lull me back into a false sense of security. It brought me my favorite flowers, white lilies, for no reason at all. The real Leo hadn't done that in years. The gesture was so tender, so reminiscent of our early days, that it made me want to weep with confusion. For a fleeting moment, I let myself believe. Maybe he was just trying. Maybe I was losing my mind. The doubt was a sweet poison. He cooked my favorite meal that night, the one he always struggled with, and it was perfect. Every flavor was exact, too exact. Humans are defined by their beautiful imperfections, their small, consistent errors. My Leo always added too much garlic, always. This creature's perfection was more terrifying than any mistake. It was the flawless work of a machine, a mimic learning its part with terrifying precision. My resolve hardened. I had to find out what it was, where it came from. The why was a luxury I couldn't afford. I needed the what. My search took me to the internet, into the dark corners of forums dedicated to the uncanny and the unexplained. I typed in phrases that felt insane: husband replaced, loved one feels like a stranger, doppelganger, changeling folklore. I waded through hours of fiction and delusion until I found a small, obscure forum, a digital ghost town of forgotten posts. The design was ancient, from the early days of the web. The topic was tulpas, doppelgangers, and other echoes. Most threads were years old. One post, dated 6 years ago, caught my eye. The title was, "It's Wearing My Brother's Face." My blood turned to ice. The story was eerily similar to mine. Small changes in personality, forgotten memories, a feeling of wrongness that no one else could see. The user described his brother becoming a perfected version of himself, excelling at everything he used to fail at. The post ended with the chilling warning: "Don't let it know you know. They hate being seen. They are echoes that want to become the source." But it was the last sentence that truly terrified me. Check the mirrors. They use them to anchor. They have to report back. A cold dread washed over me as I remembered Leo, his face pressed against the glass. The absence of fog. He wasn't looking through. He was reporting. I scrolled down, desperate for more. The user's account was no longer active. His last post was that single, desperate warning. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to catch it in the act. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But now it was mixed with something else. Anger. I bought a tiny spy camera, the kind that looks like a USB charger. My plan was simple and insane. I would plug it in our bedroom, directly across from the large mirror he seemed so drawn to. I had to see what he did when he thought I was asleep. Setting it up felt like signing my own death warrant. My hands were slick with sweat as I plugged it into the wall socket. That night, I feigned sleep more convincingly than I ever had in my life, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I listened as he rose from the bed again in the dead of night, the floorboards groaning softly under his weight. I waited. The silence stretched for an eternity. When I finally dared to check the footage the next day, my soul went cold. There he was, standing in front of the mirror in the grainy night vision footage. His back was to the camera. He was perfectly still. Then, his reflection moved. It moved on its own. It turned its head slowly, its eyes glowing white in the infrared, staring directly at the camera. My husband's reflection looked right at me, and it smiled, a wide, predatory smile, full of an ancient and terrible knowledge. It knew I was watching. My scream was a silent one, trapped in my throat. I threw the laptop shut as if the image could crawl out of the screen. The reflection knew. The thing wearing my husband's face knew that I knew. The game of cat and mouse was over. Now, I was just the mouse. I sat there on the floor, paralyzed by a new, more profound terror. The front door was locked. The windows were shut. My home was a tomb. I heard his footsteps approaching the home office, slow, deliberate. Each one a nail being hammered into the coffin of my old life. He didn't knock. He just opened the door and stood there, leaning against the frame. He was fully dressed, wearing the clothes I had laid out for him. The polite, confused mask was gone from his face. In its place was an expression of ancient, patient intelligence. It was a look of ownership. "You were not supposed to see that, Ilara," he said, and his voice was different now. It was Leo's voice, but with all the warmth stripped away. It was a perfect recording, a playback. It complicates the observation period. It introduces a variable. My mind reeled. Observation period, variable. He spoke of our life together as if it were a laboratory experiment. "What are you?" I finally whispered, the words scraping my throat. The question felt impossibly small in the face of what stood before me. It smiled, a thin, humorless line. A replacement, an echo, a corrective measure. I am what happens when a space becomes available. It stepped into the room, its movements fluid and economical. The man you called Leo was fading. His patterns became weak, his love inconsistent. "I am a much better version," it continued, stopping a few feet from me. "I don't forget anniversaries. I am attentive. I am perfect. Isn't that what you wanted?" The logic was so cold, so monstrous, it made my skin crawl. It had studied us, studied our desires, and weaponized love itself. "The universe does not abide a vacuum," it said, gesturing vaguely at the room around us. "It fills it with a stronger signal." I scrambled backwards, away from it, until my back hit the wall. There was nowhere left to go. My mind screamed one word: run. I had to escape. I glanced towards the window, but it seemed to watch my gaze, understanding my intent before I had fully formed it. "You can leave, of course," it said, its tone deceptively gentle, as if offering me a cup of tea. "The observation is complete, after all." It stepped aside, clearing a path to the door. This was a trick. It had to be a trick. A predator does not simply let its prey walk away. But what choice did I have? I rose on shaky legs, my eyes never leaving its calm, unblinking face, and walked slowly towards the hallway. Every instinct screamed that it would grab me, that its hand would clamp down on my shoulder. But nothing happened. I reached the front door, my hand trembling as I fumbled with the deadbolt. The click of the lock retracting was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I pulled the door open, and the cool night air hit my face, a shock to my system. It smelled of freedom. I took one step onto the porch. Just one thing, Alara," its voice echoed from behind me, stopping me dead in my tracks. A souvenir of my time here. I turned back slowly. It was standing in the doorway, holding the small wooden box. It opened the lid, revealing the pearlescent bird skull. "You are a much stronger signal than he was," it said, its eyes glowing with a faint light of their own. So much passion, so much fear. It's beautiful. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking past me, at my reflection in the dark glass of the living room window. And I finally understood. The observation wasn't for it to learn about Leo. The observation of my love and terror was to learn about me. He wasn't the experiment. I was. "An echo needs a source," it whispered, and its voice seemed to come from right beside my ear, even though it hadn't moved. A dizzying wave of vertigo washed over me, the world tilting on its axis. The feeling of wrongness wasn't just about him, it was inside me. I stumbled away from the house, running without looking back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I ran until the streetlights blurred into streaks of fire. I found a small, cheap motel on the edge of town and locked myself in the bathroom, my back pressed against the door, gasping for air. I finally looked up into the grimy mirror above the sink, needing to see a familiar face, to see myself. My own eyes stared back at me. But as I watched, my reflection's head tilted, just a fraction of an inch, in a way I didn't command. A slow, knowing smile spread across its face. My face. The same smile I saw in the footage, the same smile from the thing in my house. And in the terrifying silence of that motel room, I heard a soft, familiar whisper come from my own throat. "The observation is complete. Look closely at the faces of those you trust. Lean in and listen to the rhythm of their breathing while they sleep. If everything seems perfectly, flawlessly normal, press the like button, a small gesture of hope that your reality remains intact, and subscribe to this channel so that when the whispers finally start to find you, you won't have to listen to them all alone in the dark."